The Applied Energy Research Team at the Nova Scotia Community College develops and tests sustainable energy alternatives. The team is led by Dr. Wayne Groszko. They test better methods of collecting and analyzing big data related to energy use. Let's see what he has to say about solar energy, new discoveries, and bidirectional charging. Hi, Dr. Wayne Groszko.
Hello, Maria. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for joining me. I'm really excited to hear about all the work that you're doing at NSCC. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to NSCC.
Sure. So I work as the Applied Energy Research Scientist at the Nova Scotia Community College. So I manage a team of research associates, and we do practical research and development projects with local companies mostly and communities on renewable energy, sustainable energy, energy storage, things to do with the transition to decarbonized energy. And I came here through a long road of research and consulting and teaching, and really got my start in that with the realization many years ago that we need to urgently address the climate crisis, and that obviously gets clearly more urgent every year. So that's what inspired me to get into the renewable energy field.
What projects are you and your team working on right now?
We're working on a few. Most of what we do can land in the categories of solar energy and energy storage, along with energy management and a bit about the applications of that energy. So to take some examples, we recently completed a test chamber that a startup company can use to test their new kind of solar panels. So they're working on perovskite solar cells, which are a new material, which hopefully will turn out to be both cheaper, more flexible, and as effective as the existing silicon solar cells, and needed a test chamber to test out those cells. We've also tested solar panels from a company that's designing them specifically for use in a particular application, which in this case is on sailing boats. And in the energy storage realm, we are working on with a couple of startup companies on testing and pilot projects of ways of storing energy in the form of heat, so thermal energy storage. When we think of energy storage, often we will think of batteries, such as lithium batteries that store electricity, and those are also a great way to store energy. However, most of what we need energy for, especially in Canada, is heat. And if you can find ways, which there are ways, to store energy as heat for relatively short periods of time, let's say half a day to a day or two, that being able to store that heat has almost the same effectiveness as storing in a battery, but it has the potential to be much less expensive, so much more affordable to implement. And an example is we have been working with some companies to test units that will go into a home, and they contain a non-toxic material that absorbs heat and can wait and release that heat later. Its technical term is called a phase change material. And with that, you can absorb a lot more heat than with other technologies and regain that heat later with a very high efficiency and effectiveness. So we've helped test a couple of systems and products that use that material and that principle. And then in the battery realm, we also have recently helped build a really interesting prototype of a battery energy storage system, which is something that you could install in a building to provide backup power and to provide what are called peak shaving services. So when there's demand on the grid, you would use the battery instead and avoid some of your demand charges. Those products exist already, but what is really interesting about this one is it's made using repurposed batteries, sort of what we call second life batteries, from electric and hybrid vehicles. So they've already had one use in vehicle and have come out of the vehicle for various reasons. And it's possible, and we work with this company to make the prototype to be able to use that, give it a second life, providing power in our building. So that's a few examples of some of the things we're currently working on.
Yeah. What about bidirectional charging? I mean, there seems to be a lot of talk about that capability. What can happen?
Yeah, so bidirectional charging would be the capability of an electric vehicle when it's plugged in to contribute some of the energy and power in the battery back into whatever it's plugged into, the building, grid, or an off-grid load. And the equipment to do that does exist. And we have, at NSCC, we had the great fortune to install and test the first commercially available certified one in Atlantic, Canada. And that's a unit that can contribute up to 30 kilowatts of power back into a building, which we installed it at one of our campuses and tested it out and found that it worked as specified. So that was a good project and a good partnership for us also with the electric utility here in Nova Scotia Power. The reason that there's so much talk about bidirectional charging for electric vehicles is because of the vast amount of storage capacity that our coming and future fleet of vehicles represents. Easily, even in a small province like Nova Scotia, there are hundreds of thousands of personal vehicles, and each one has, once they are, become electric, which the adoption rates of electric vehicles are increasing all the time. The battery in an individual electric vehicle is quite large compared with, let's say, the usage of a home. If you had the equipment and you plugged in your electric vehicle to your home, and if you just picture kind of a fairly ordinary single family dwelling, if there was a power outage emergency and you were sparing with your power, you could run your home from your car for a couple of days. So it's significant. And the neat thing about that capacity is that people are buying electric cars anyway for their other advantages.
Right.
Lower operating costs, lower greenhouse gas emissions, lower maintenance costs, and just the driving experience and the want to have an electric vehicle. That's a significant investment. And it comes with this very large battery in it, which means if you can get affordable bidirectional charging equipment, then suddenly you have a home battery too.
Exactly.
At much lower incremental costs than going out and purchasing a home battery and installing it in your home. So it does have enormous potential, and the ability to capitalize on that potential is something that is still in development. That field is very much in flux. There are 4 or 5 different sorts of bidirectional chargers that are available on the market, mostly in other countries. And part of it is just the process and of getting them certified for use in Canada and meeting all the standards and so on and testing. But we're involved in that, and we see that as having a lot of potential as well.
Sorry to interrupt here, but did you know that this podcast is a passion project of Sociable Media? And this is where I get to do a shameless plug for our services. Sociable Media is a digital marketing agency that works with clients in the renewable energy sector. We design websites, manage social media, run ad campaigns, write content, all that sort of digital marketing stuff. I just want to throw that in there. Now back to the podcast. One of your research projects involved seawater and something to do with how you could use less energy by extracting the seawater. Or tell me a little bit more about that.
Oh, that's a really fun project. So that's OK Sea Salt, which is a local salt producer. So they produce sea salt here in Nova Scotia. And the way they do that is the way that sea salt has been produced as a time-honored tradition for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
They go and gather seawater, and they evaporate the water until the salt is gone. Or, sorry, the salt is there, the water is gone. So
Right.
you harvest the salt. So that process typically starts by putting the water out in a covered kind of like coal frame so that the sun can naturally help it evaporate. And that works, but it takes quite a long time, especially in the climate of Nova Scotia and in winter. There's just not enough sun to make that evaporate the water quickly enough for the amount of production that's needed. And so then if you move to essentially using purchased energy, such as electricity, then you're evaporating the water, you're boiling it off. It uses tremendous amounts of energy to do that. The heat capacity, the capacity of boiling the water is really large. So our project involved testing out or trying out some different ways to try to reduce that energy. And we came up with 3 different ways that could potentially be reduced. One was adding more solar heat into the essentially the evaporation box by using a solar water heater. So it's a fairly simple solution. And another one was what's called a heat pump vacuum extractor. So if you apply a vacuum if you place the water under vacuum, then it'll evaporate more quickly at a lower temperature. So essentially reduces the boiling temperature and therefore reduces it to a low enough temperature that you can put the heat in with a heat pump, which in principle should be more efficient. So we tested some equipment. We still have some ways to go in terms of the equipment was really kind of a rough prototype and it needs refinement before it will actually be more efficient than what they're currently doing now, which is boiling off the water using normal electric stoves. We even found a third, which I think has great potential, not just for salt making, but for the whole food drying industry generally, which is a completely different approach called electrostatic drying. And we learned this through an engineering professor at Dalhousie University, which is one of the great things about what we do is we're able to make partnerships with a lot of different academic institutions. And they had found that this phenomenon that if you apply a strong static electric field to a essentially plate full of water, it will evaporate 3 times as fast, even at room temperature, which means, and that electrostatic field takes very little electric energy to produce. So I think this shows fantastic potential for drying food, for making things like syrup out of apple juice and anything where you need to evaporate water. I'm hoping, and this hasn't come to fruition yet, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to set up a longer term project to build bigger prototypes of electrostatic dryers, working with the profs at Dow, and making this more commonly available in the food industry.
Well, it's interesting. Canada is so well known for its maple syrup, so maybe this is one way to produce it faster in the springtime.
The actual reason why we found out about it is this technique is super useful for making birch syrup. So the syrup can also be made from birch sap, of which we have a lot. And the thing about birch sap is its sugar content is different and its taste is damaged by heat. So if you want a good birch syrup product, you cannot heat it up above a certain temperature, which makes it very difficult to evaporate the water, unless you apply something like electrostatic drying. And again, it was through this is all about connections. Like it was through a connection to Norm Popin, a faculty member here at NSCC. His kind of side almost hobby was making birch syrup. Therefore, he knew about these different technologies, which we then investigated.
Interesting. it's kind of like a happy accident, or just kind of how silly putty was invented, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So how do you involve the students in all of the projects that you take part of? How do you include the students?
Yeah. So that's a really important part of what we do. And my role at NSCC, I don't actually teach any courses. I run this lab all the time. And the way that we involve students in it is keeping in touch with the faculty members and professors. We see if there's opportunities for them to do their senior projects. So they have to do senior projects, and so they could do a research project with us. And they also do often internships and work terms as part of their work experience. And so we, at any given time, we normally have a number of students working in the lab on projects, and they learn quite a lot from that. And we benefit greatly from their help. Right now, we have 2 students, and one just finished their work term. So that's kind of an ongoing process.
What about job opportunities and future trends for the students that you work with? What do you see it looking like in the renewable energy sector?
So the renewable energy field globally and in Canada, and in that I would also add the energy efficiency sector and all these skills and jobs related to the transition to low or net zero carbon, is essentially a rapidly growing field. In general, there are lots of opportunities. There's lots of jobs for folks with technical skills. There's lots of startup companies, lots of new activity, and more established companies kind of adjusting their mandates to fit the ongoing changes in the reality of decarbonization. It's I see it as a lot of opportunity, and for the most part, folks who are graduating in fields like electrical engineering technology, electrical energy sustainability engineering technology, they're basically often they're hired before they're graduated. So it's a pretty active field right now.
What's next for NSCC's applied research program?
Well, speaking specifically in the energy, because NSCC has 5 applied research areas, including agriculture and geomatics and IT and several. And the energy one is the one that I am directly involved in. And one of our new things is we're starting what we're calling a clean marine propulsion lab. And that's our entry into the space of the energy required for boats, so for marine vessels. And what we're looking at is, with some support from the Canada Foundation for Innovation and Research in Nova Scotia, getting the equipment and a lab set up to be able to help design and test clean propulsion systems. So that's mostly electric drives for boats, also hybrid, say diesel electric, and looking towards the future to potentially hydrogen powered vessels. That is getting underway now, and the size category that we're focusing on is not so much like the tiny pleasure craft and not so much the giant container ships, but the things in between. So lobster fishing vessels, ferries, vessels used for research and security and those kind of things. So we've done our first couple of small projects, and we're ramping up with that. One of our hopes is soon to work with a local boat builder to produce our own version of an electric boat that our students in our Oceans Technology Advanced Diploma program can use when they go out. So, their program is about
Excellent.
working at sea. And
Yeah.
we think while they're learning about working at sea, they should be doing it in a cutting edge electric boat.
That's excellent. It's nice to see the cross usage of of a craft, from one program to another. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Wayne. And it's great to hear about all the research that you're doing for businesses and companies, but also teaching students and showing them, the practices and the procedures that are needed in this exciting, renewable energy industry sector. So,
Well, thank you, Maria, for inviting me to speak about it. It's it's been a lot of fun talking about it.
all right. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later.
Yep, me too. See you, Maria.
Thank you for listening. Hey, would you like to be a future guest on Reimagined Energy? If so, send me an email at podcast@sociablemedia.co. A big shout out to our sponsor, Smart Energy, Canada's clean technology event. It's an annual conference that's held every year in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm Maria McGowan. Cheers for now.